Hi there. I'm just going to read you a chapter out of a book that I've just finished called Self Healing, Yoga and Destiny. This is by an author called Eilisabeth Haich. It's also co-authored by somebody called Selvarajan Yesudian, which I've never heard of him as an author. I've not read any of his books before, if he's written books, but I have read another book by Eilisabeth Haich called Initiation, which was phenomenal. I really enjoyed it, and it really sort of resonated with my own personal experiences. And again, this book doesn't disappoint. It's not a particularly thick book, but it's got a wealth of knowledge in it. But the final chapter for me just sort of sums up mostly what I feel about spiritual development. And I don't agree with everything that she's written, but I agree with most of it, or it resonates with me. So, and I think it's quite important information. So I'm going to just read the chapter out for you. So it's called A Few Words About Magic. And this is the final chapter in the book. When an uninitiated person hears the word magic, he sees before his inner eye either an old witch who, sitting in a cave dimly lighted by a mystic fire, is busy murmuring incantations and stirring magic potions in her kettle, or a man garbed in a long cape and pointed hat, setting in motion mysterious, irresistible forces with his wand. Or if hypothetical uninitiated person is satisfied with everyday phenomena, he will perhaps think of a village fortune teller or gypsy who teaches people spooky rituals and secret recipes for salves and potions with allegedly magic powers, taking great care of himself, or herself of course, to get the greater share of the benefits out of the whole magic business. Generally speaking, this is what people think of as magic, for they do know what magic really is. They don't know that they do not need to visit a witch's kitchen or a wizened old wizard to find out more about magic. They don't realise that they are coming up face to face with magic in everything they do, day after day, throughout their lives. Even less do they realise that they take all the rest of us, knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally, are constantly performing magic. In actual fact, we would not be able to live and move and have our being without magic. What, then, is magic? Natural forces guided by man. When a gardener plants a seed, he is practicing magic because he gives the mighty natural forces hidden within the seed the possibility of developing, of coming out of its dormant state into one of activity. If the gardener does not plant the seed, it will always remain a seed. But the gardener brings into operation the mighty natural forces slumbering within it by placing it in a suitable environment. The natural forces brought into operation in this way then perform their task. A miracle happens. A new life is born out of the tiny, unprepossessing seed. A sprout comes up out of the earth, a flower which in its turn brings forth many similar seeds filled with the same tremendous natural force. When a person builds and stocks a pond for breeding fish, he too is performing magic. He puts in only a few fish, yet after a time many of them are swimming around in the pond. Isn't this magic? There's magic too in what the farmer's wife does when she collects her hen's eggs. Sees to it that they are kept at the right temperature for the right length of time. Then, lo and behold, at the end of 21 days, the same little hen is parading around with an impressive brood. The same little hen. Instead of our one chicken, the farmer's wife has many of them. A person who gets into a boat and hoists a sail is practicing magic too. For behold, he doesn't need to row, because the boat is driven by a force, the wind. He merely needs to guide and control it. And along with all of these people who are practicing magic in one form or another, everyone who throws a switch and turns on an electric light, or gets into his car and pushes a few mysterious buttons and levers, causing the car to move away under its own power, is engaging in magic too. The actor who makes his audience cry or laugh is a magician. And so we could go on. We could, in fact, list our every single movement, for we cannot use a single nerve fibre or organ of our sense without engaging in magic. Why don't people know that all this is magic? Because they only speak of magic when someone is setting in operation natural forces which the masses of people do not understand. Because they use the term magician in speaking only of persons who are acquainted with these unknown forces and are able to guide them in accordance with their will. The moment a so-called magician reveals and describes to the people around him a force they have hitherto regarded as magic, he immediately ceases to be a magician in their eyes, and the utilization of the unknown force ceases to be magic. The force receives a new name, and from this point on, people speak about it with some contempt, even though they may not have the vaguest idea themselves what this new force really is. They are able to use it. It has a name, and that's all that matters for them. It isn't a miracle anymore. People thought Galvani was a sorcerer simply because, as they came to hear about it, the devil himself was living in Galvani's mysterious wires. Whoever touched a wire got a powerful shock, and was fortunate indeed if he didn't fall over dead on the spot. At the end of Galvani's wires, dead frogs' legs appeared to have come back to life again. The moment Galvani made his knowledge available to the public, he ceased to be a magician. He became simply a physicist, and the mysterious force wasn't magic anymore. Soon the most ignorant apprentice was glibly calling it electricity, but neither he nor the most erudite scientist knows what electricity really is. Cagliostro, Saint-Germain, Paracelsus, Mesmer, and many others who have healed with mysterious forces were decried as sorcerers. Today, people talk condescendingly about hypnosis and suggestion, but neither they, nor for the most part those who possess hypnotic powers, know what forces are at work in hypnosis and suggestion. Science has given these phenomena a name, and so they have ceased to be miracles. In actual fact, however, even the laws governing these phenomena are not yet sufficiently known. Let us consider for a few moments the simplest and best known forms of magic. Let us assume that I am travelling into the African jungle and that I have a rendezvous at a specified place and time with a person whose general level of development is similar to my own. I arrive punctually at the appointed place, but my friend isn't there. I wait and wait, but he still does not show up. Then I take a piece of paper and write him a message saying that I cannot wait any longer and I am going back to my tent, which is located about a mile to the north on the bank of such and such a river. I will continue to wait for him there. I take the paper, stick it on a tree trunk, and go to my tent. Some time later, my friend arrives at the appointed place, reads my note, immediately strikes out northward, and soon finds me at my campsite. How do the illiterate natives describe this simple event? The white magicians, they say, took out a magic wand, which he used to attach a spirit to the paper by means of strange, irregular lines. The spirit then led my friend to the exact spot where the magician was waiting. Are the natives right? Yes, because writing really is magic and really does attach spirit to paper. Although, of course, not the spirit the ignorant person imagines it to be. Those of us who are acquainted with this method of attaching spirit to paper no longer call it magic, but simply writing. But what a miracle writing actually is. Wise men who lived thousands of years ago can still speak to us and teach us through the power of writing. And whenever we want to, we can send our thoughts, our feelings, part of ourselves to the very ends of the earth. Truly, writing conquers time and space. In a similar way, the various kinds of unintelligible, illegible scribblings used by magicians to conjure up spirits, pentagram, Solomon's seal, Star of David, Star of Christ, swastika, and other signs and figures with magic effects, are really just as simple as the words and letters we use in our own writings. And these forces, which we call spirits, are totally nothing but simple, everyday forces, such as those that work in the germination of a grain of wheat and in the writing of a letter. The only difference is that in these latter activities we are acquainted with the forces at work and know how to use them, whereas only initiates know how to use the magic signs and figures. As soon as we understand these signs, they cease to be magic. But the greatest magic word is language, sound, the word logos. The work of creation set the power of the Logos in motion. The Logos created order out of chaos and is still doing so today. It moves the words in space and animates everything that is alive. Logos is the most powerful magic force available to every living creature. The inspired individual uses this power consciously and in this way can work so-called miracles for the benefit of mankind. And the ignorant individual uses the same force, but unconsciously, and for this reason usually is a curse to mankind. If we stop to think for a moment that it is possible to cause a glass to burst into 1,000 tiny pieces simply by no other means than a sound appropriate to the glass. Let us not forget that sound is the creative element of the Logos. Then we can realise how much power is available to us, a person who understands the depth and scope of sound. Just as a glass has its own characteristic tone, the Logos dwelling within it, which maintains it in existence or can just as easily destroy it. In just the same way, in everything that exists, there is the Logos dwelling within it. Its own characteristic sound, its own name, the name made up of the elements of its true being and given to it by God. Whoever can hear this name, never berating in the depths of things, has achieved omnipotence over everything that exists. To an unlimited degree, he is master of life and death. In one place in the Bible, God says, "And I call thee by thy name." And Christ's disciples say, "Master, even the devils obey us through thy name." Christ awakens Jairus' daughter and Lazarus, who had already been dead several days, simply by calling them by their names, but not with the names people had given them, but the true inner names which animated their being. Monks, when entering an order, cast off their worldly names and receive new names. In this act there is a deeper meaning, but it is comprehensible only to those who understand the essence of the Logos. But even people who do not understand the omnipresent power of the Logos are able to work with it when they talk to other people, particularly to members of the opposite sex, using the power of the Logos to charm them, each according to his own individual level of development. When we persuade someone, we are performing magic with the Logos, with the power of the word. Whenever we get something out of somebody else by flattery, as the fox in the fable prevailed over the raven to drop the piece of cheese, we are performing magic with the Logos, with the word. Everyone has the power to calm or to irritate the people around him, to put them in a good humour or make them angry. All with the power of the Logos, depending on whether he speaks to them amiably or offensively. We all know from personal experience that a well-meant piece of advice can often echo on within us for years. A single simple sentence can affect our whole life, guide us and keep us from making mistakes. In many cases, it doesn't matter at all from whom we heard it. The most important thing is that it came from the positive forces of the Logos. In the same way, the wrong words can be a curse, ruining many lives. A person who, perhaps only in a fit of rage, hurls forth the Logos in a negative direction almost certainly does not know how much destruction he is causing by doing so. In this respect, most people are quite ignorant, without even the barest notion of the indwelling power in blessing and cursing. Nevertheless, they use them, and in doing so are like children playing with matches. They do not yet know the power and the laws of the Logos. Experiments in this field are already being made in university-level medical schools. The results achieved are being formulated and taught, and many doctors already know the healing power of the Logos, the word in the form of hypnosis and verbal suggestion. Gypsies, too, know these powers and are able to use them. Anyone who has had the privilege of observing them closely knows for sure that this is not just superstition. The average man knows nothing about the high use of the Logos. This is why he refers to persons who are able to set natural forces in motion through the use of words as magicians. And if such persons happen to be women, they are called witches. The action itself is called magic or sorcery. Actually, however, when a magician controls spirits with incantations, he is only doing what every shepherd does in his controlling his dog by whistling and calling out a few clear words, all communicating orders which the dog promptly executes. This is just as much a miracle as the conjuring of spirits. No one can see the mysterious relationship between the man and the dog, and no one can know what kind of a mental instrument is at work in the dog when he is impelled by the Logos in the words pronounced by the shepherd to run in a certain direction or perform a specified task. In essence, these relationships are just as invisible and mysterious as those existing between the magician the spirits he controls, and the incantations with which he does so. Those who wish to learn in this high school of magic, in addition to following many other prerequisites, must be master of a very important natural law, the master of equilibrium. They must know that we live in a world of polarity, and that everything is made alive and maintained by tension and equilibrium between positive and negative. They must know that nature always strives to teach and preserve a balance through compensation. When we know this, we can consciously use this tendency of nature in the interest of our teaching a specific goal, just as a miller uses the power of flowing water to drive the wheels of his mill. Whatever we may want to build, be it a house, a watchtower, a bridge, a ship, an aeroplane, or even a simple piece of furniture, we must build in accordance with the principle of equilibrium. The house would tumble down, the bridge fall into the water, the ship sink, and the aeroplane never get off the ground if they were not all built in accordance with the principles of equilibrium. We could not even stand or walk, and all the dancers, ice skaters, and acrobats could not perform a single act without conforming fully to the principles of balance and geometry. What holds the celestial bodies in their proper places in space? The equilibrium of various forces. To the extent that just one of all of these forces changes, the remaining forces change to an exactly equal extent in order that equilibrium be restored. Nature doesn't tolerate any unbalanced condition. Once we know this fact, we can also understand why it is that we cannot make a single movement without mobilizing the compensatory forces of nature against us. We cannot press down one pan of a balance without causing the other pan to rise by an equal amount. Wherever there is light, there is shadow too, and the stronger the light, the stronger the shadow. No matter what happens, nature operates to restore equilibrium. If we add the darkness of the shadow to the brightness of the light, the result will always be zero. When Christ is born, the Antichrist appears too. After the 7 years of great plenty, there follow 7 years of famine. After great joy, there comes great sorrow, and after weeping, rejoicing. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. He who taught this knew the workings of the principle of compensation and equilibrium. He knew that nature, not only in the created world outside, but also within the human soul, always strives to offset negative forces by positive ones, and vice versa, so that their sum total always comes to zero. Man too calms down only when he has found his spiritual equilibrium, only when within his being the sum of the spiritual positive and physical negative forces is exactly zero. The omniscient magician knows this principle, and thus has in his power to set natural forces in motion both in the visible material world and the invisible spiritual one. For him there is nothing impossible. He becomes almighty. When we learn about these things, we are inclined to ask, and quite rightly so, if all that is possible, why is this knowledge hidden away from people? Why is there only a restricted number of chosen ones who know the secrets of magic, and why do they hide their knowledge so carefully? The answer is very simple: to keep people from practicing black magic. But what is black magic and white magic? Black magic is the selfish use of natural forces, and white magic the unselfish. But let us note one point carefully. Black magic is not magic performed with selfish intentions, but magic performed selfishly. There is a difference. It is possible for a person to be acting with the purest, most selfless intentions and still, without being conscious of it, be practicing selfish black magic. This part is really important. But the natural forces are blind and unmerciful and unfailingly destroy those who sin against them, whether or not such persons do so knowingly or unknowingly. It is a very wise arrangement that our psychic sight develops parallel with our spiritual progress. This is what I've always felt. In this way, the person who stands on a low level of development and acts with a selfish point of view is unable to pull down the higher spiritual forces to his own low level and thus completely destroy himself through practicing black magic. As the Bible says, to cast himself into outer darkness. A person on a low level of development acts selfishly, and because of his action sets natural forces in motion, he is engaging in magic, for the most part black magic. Woe betide him, then, were he to pull down the spiritual forces operating on the divine plane to his own low level. Those forces would destroy him, just as high voltage current snuffs out the life of the person who unwittingly touches the wire. It is lucky for him that since he is selfish, his spiritual sight is so restricted that he does not know the secret of setting higher powers in motion. Lucky for him that he knows how to use only relatively weak forces. But the reverse is caused for him by these very weak forces, as the certain reaction to his selfish deeds are enough for him. These reverses cause him enough trouble and suffering, fortunately only as much as he can really bear, for him to learn from them and gather experience. Here too the principle of equilibrium applies. He sets in motion forces corresponding to his own low level of development, and consequently the sufferings they cause for him cannot be greater than his own strength. On the other hand, the trouble he gets himself into teaches him gradually that he must not do certain things, and that if he does, pain and anguish will follow. Gradually he learns to recognize relationships. In this way, his ignorance is the very cause and means of his development. Corresponding to his low level will be both the black magic he performs and the pain he must bear as a consequence of it. Little by little, the experience he gains through this suffering leads him into higher spiritual development. It is simply amazing how wisely all of this is arranged. Our own ignorance helps us to knowledge. Let us now see why we must make such a nice distinction between selfishness and selfish, although seemingly unselfish, intentions. How is it really possible for a person with the purest intention, most unselfish intentions, to act selfishly? As long as an individual has not become completely impersonal, he cannot be objective. He will always judge things subjectively, and his viewpoints will always be selfish. Only when a person has become impersonal can he become selfless in the truest sense of the word. Let us take an example. Suppose we see a lame beggar. We feel pity for him. If we could perform magic, which, let me repeat, merely means utilising natural forces of which the people around us are generally ignorant, we would immediately lay out our hand upon the beggar and heal him. Our intention is based on our love for others, and we imagine we have acted selflessly. We would certainly be greatly surprised if, as a reward for this magic deed, there should be a reaction that would cause us to suffer for the rest of our life. For it is quite conceivable that this lame beggar, once healed, might make ill use of these recovered physical powers, that with his healthy limbs he might now rob and kill. Let us not forget that the beggar's paralysis was a result of his karma. His uncomfortable condition makes it possible for him to gather certain experiences, to learn certain things, to develop spiritually, to discover what he must not do in order to avoid being struck by the same fate in the future. Through our healing him prematurely, we have taken from him the possibility of gaining this experience and opened up new possibilities for him to sin and fall back into wrongdoing. Our act of healing him gave us a pleasant, happy feeling because we judged the matter from our own standpoint. We did not see into the beggar's heart. We did not see the beast dwelling within him. We did not see that it would be better for him to remain lame than to fall into wrongdoing. We believed the lame beggar to be like ourselves, thinking that once he healed, he would live a life like ours. Our basic mistake was to consider the beggar's paralysis from our own standpoint instead of from his. Had we been able to see the matter with complete objectivity and to know what was really good for the beggar, we would have recognised that he actually needed a temporary restriction on his freedom of movement. We would have seen clearly that if prematurely healed, he would commit still worse crimes than those which led to his condition of paralysis. Our unselfish intentions were quite useless. As long as we see things only from our own standpoint, we will always sin. Let me emphasize that what I am saying here refers to healing through magic. Medical science is developing parallel to the progress of the world, and the application of its discoveries thus corresponds to divine law. But let us never forget that the progress of science also demands its martyrs. Nature is merciless and blind. Nature pays no heed to intentions alone, however good they may be, and she will continue to punish a bungler who is reaching out in search of unknown natural laws until he has learnt these laws thoroughly. On the other hand, it is just as much a fact that a person who has not yet mastered the lesson he must learn through a physical disorder or disability cannot be healed by medical science either. Christ was able to heal the paralysed with spiritual powers, that is by magic, because he saw who had learnt his lessons, whose time was up, whose sins had been forgiven. And let us not forget that all of the many sick at Bethesda, he said only one, arise and go. Certainly, Jesus would just as gladly have healed the others, but he saw that their time had not yet come, that from their own spiritual standpoint, they still needed to do penance, and so he let them go on being sick. Let us take heart from this example. Whenever anything troubles us, we can always find our first consolation in remembering that it will go on troubling us until we have learnt our lesson from it. So let us always try to find the lessons hidden within our sufferings, instead of ranting ignorantly at our fate. We can be certain that as soon as we have found the answer and learnt our lesson, the time will be at hand for our suffering to end. People of goodwill who do not yet possess psychic sight should rejoice and be glad that they cannot yet perform high magic. They would merely do harm to their relatives, their friends, and all others who turn to them in their need. In carrying out their will by means of magic, they would liberate them from their material needs, heal the dying, restore to the bereaved lovers the objective of their love, cause employees who have been passed over at promotion time to be named to executive positions, and so rob all of these people of their opportunity to overcome their sins, to become pure and so develop. By and large, people still regard death as a horrible phenomenon, and they would do anything they possibly could to keep their loved ones alive on this plane of existence, simply in order not to have to go on living without them. We should all of us realise, however, that no harm at all can come to a person simply because he goes on when his hour has struck. God, who controls our destiny, knows best whose time has come and why he must go. The embryo in his mother's womb leads a sheltered life, protected from everything, yet it is certainly best for the embryo when its time has come to pass on into earthly life. And were we to prevent it from doing so, we would be committing a heinous crime, for we would be sinning against the laws of nature. As long as we are only able to look at things from our own standpoint, we must let God continue to guide the destinies of people and things, while we rejoice that we are not able to perform magic. We can be profoundly grateful that we do not have to bear such unimaginably great responsibility. But how about those who have achieved the high level of impersonal objectivity? May such persons use their high spiritual magic powers? Yes. Not only may they use their powers, but it is even their duty to apply their knowledge to the great task of redeeming the earth. With such people, we do not need to worry lest they use their great knowledge and powers to produce love potions for pay, or with seemingly noble, unselfish motives to alter the fate of a person, a family, or a nation, and thereby rob the individuals or groups concerned of some of their possibilities for development. Such a highly developed person will not use his spiritual powers on his own, but will always act as an instrument for the execution of the will of God. He places this person at God's disposal, and so it is not he who uses these powers, but rather they who use him. Such high beings have no personal wishes anymore, no personal viewpoint, no personal will, because all of these are used by our consciousness and moved by one will. In the Gospel, according to St. John, Jesus is quoted as having said, "I can of mine own self do nothing, as I hear, I judge. And my judgment is just, because I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which hath sent me." Chapter 5, verse 30. In modern parlance, Jesus is simply saying, "I cannot do anything on my own." This means that we cannot allow ourselves to be guided by personal viewpoints. As long as we have personal viewpoints, we cannot become a higher being. It's either one or the other. The clear and decisive difference between black and white magic is simply this. A black magician is one who uses the powers, and a white magician is one who is used by the divine powers. So let us try to become white magicians as quickly as possible. I know there are many who long to attain this level of development as fast as they can. In this connection, let me say that there are a number of methods we can use to speed up the development of our soul, and hand in hand with it, that of our nervous system. These methods may be compared to the work of the gardener who plants and nurtures hyacinth bulbs in such a way as to bring the plants to bloom at Christmas time instead of in the spring, as they normally would. At this point, however, we must pause to think for a moment of the training of an athlete. Only from a rigorous medical examination can it be known whether his heart and lungs are strong enough to stand up under a heavy program of regular training. In the same way, throughout all of our ages, mankind's development, disciples moving on the path towards magic have been subjected to the most rigorous trials. Initiation is granted only to those who pass them all. What are these trials, and what are the prerequisites involved? Even though we cannot become magicians suddenly, we would like at least to know how to get along on our path as fast as possible. The first important requirement is patience. It is really a bit strange that this should be so, for these are in this earthly life of ours plenty of other things that are not to be had without some patience. Let us think for a moment of the persistent effort it takes to become an accomplished musician. Even if we are born with an abundance of talent, we must spend some 10 to 15 years in diligent practice and training before we are ready to appear in public. And even then, we must go on practicing on and on throughout our entire career. Those who want to achieve the ability to use spiritual powers in the performance of high magic must be willing to practice and exercise not only as much as the musician must, but much more, keeping everlastingly at it without interruption for years and years. And when results begin to appear, he must be willing to exercise even harder, even more diligently. All this takes infinite patience and perseverance. Most people imagine that performing magic requires only the mumbling of a few incantations, the making of a cloud of smoke over the fire, or the brewing of mysterious potions with witches' fat according to a secret recipe. No, it just isn't that simple. We cannot become a piano virtuoso in a week, and to become a magician we need patience and determination as strong as steel. We must keep ourselves, our physical and mental desires, our thoughts, our emotions, and even our most secret urges under constant control. We must observe ourselves with draconian severity, never allowing ourselves, even for a moment, to be tempted to wish to submerge ourselves in the astral world. We must have no passions. We must cling to nothing and no one, either living or dead. In everything we must seek and find the true being of the essence, the eternal, and we must look at everything from the standpoint of universal love. In everything that is personal, we must recognize the temporal, which changes and passes away, and we must never feel pain or sorrow when the moment of passing ever comes. And let us not imagine that by virtue of achieving this impersonal and objective viewpoint, we may gradually become dulled and blunted. Quite the contrary. We will be all the more able to rejoice with the joyful and to feel more true sympathy for those who mourn. We will be able to understand our fellow man better and experience the true love of others in better and higher fashion than those who cling to the personal. This is because our practice of strict self-observation and self-control of all our thoughts and emotions will enable us to transform with relative ease the baser instincts and emotions like sexuality, covetousness, vanity, envy, false pride, and craving for power into higher qualities. Sexuality will be transmuted into a love of our fellow man, covetousness into a proper evaluation of material things, envy into unselfishness, vanity into properly applied self-confidence, and false pride into true modesty. If we want to attain the powers of high magic, we must not only pay heed to our mental state, but also to our nourishment, what we eat and drink. We must eat as little meat as possible and avoid alcohol, tobacco, and all kinds of narcotics. If at all possible, we should sleep with our window open, lying in the north to south direction, without a pillow, or at the most only one. If we want to progress as fast as possible along the path towards high spiritual powers, we should spend much time outdoors in nature and get into close contact with the animal world. We should try to discover the mysterious driving forces which cause animals to move, and in parallel fashion, the obscure sources of human motivation. Last but not least, we should seek out the link between all the various forms created by nature and the meaning within, beyond and above them. When we discover this link, we will understand the language of animals and the significance of the constituent parts of the logos of the word letters. We should always try to recognize the true inner name of things, the forces which are hidden behind the letters, the relationships of sound, colour, odour, taste, and form. Then our next great task is to learn the sacredness of silence. We must find out how to keep our knowledge to ourselves. We dare not cast our pearls before swine, lest they be devoured uselessly and without appreciation. We must learn to keep silent too when others with less knowledge are showing off in our presence and trying to tell us what's what. This is a simultaneous test of our vanity and humility. But we must not only learn to practice being silent in this way, we must get acquainted with the great powers that hide themselves in silence. We must learn that although being able to keep silent, we begin to hear a great deal that is new. How much wisdom we can acquire step by step. When we can keep silent in a forest, we soon notice to our amazement that everything is beginning to talk to us. The trees, the flowers, the big thistle leaf on the bank of the stream, even the stream itself and the dragonfly hovering over it. When we go about on foot among the high mountains, we will discover to our surprise that we can learn things from them, even from the bald rocks and cliffs that reach up toward the sky. Even these can speak to us if we exercise the observance of sacred silence. And the ocean. Whoever has sat in silence for a few hours at the seashore knows how impenetrably deep is the wisdom of the ocean, an inexhaustible storehouse of knowledge. What wonderful things it tells us about eternity, about immortality, about art, love, life, about God. If you try, you will be amazed to find that at the very moment when you are quite alone, sitting in silence on the seashore, in the mountains, in a forest, or in a desert night, at just this very moment you are not alone. And then you will understand the hermit, the Indian yogi, the lonely desert dweller, and you will realize that they have chosen to go off by themselves and lead a so-called lonely life simply because they could no longer tolerate the state of being alone among so many people. Some persons may perhaps think that it is only a poetic flight of the imagination to speak about the language of the forests, the waters, and the mountains, but let us remember that every great teacher of humanity, every great prophet, and the greatest of them all, Jesus himself, went through the great trial of sacred silence. Each of them went off into the lonely desert before he began to live out of his calling among people, for out there in the great silence they heard their inner calling. There are people who live out their everyday lives surrounded by others. They have families, parents, or children. Generally speaking, they are surrounded by people of goodwill, and yet they feel as if they are all alone in a kind of cruel desolation. Once we have learnt the lesson of sacred silence, such a thing can never happen to us again. Whoever has listened only once to the voice of the silence will always long to hear it again, and whoever can not only hear the voice of the silence, but also understand it, is already standing on the threshold of sanctuary. He has already reached the point where a certain of his nerve centres, previously in a dormant condition, have gradually become active. His spiritual eye is opened, and he begins to see the soul of the people about him, the spirit at work, everywhere, the cosmic relationships. He understands the symbolic language of the Bible, of other holy books, and of the great mystics. All at once he notices that his words and deeds have different results from those of average people. He notices that greater forces are set in motion by his will than was formerly the case. He observes that his words now carry so much power that people remember them for years. He notices that others approach him in confidence because they detect the radiation of his impersonal love for his fellow man. That his presence brings out the good in people of goodwill and the bad from those who are living on a lower plane of development. That in his presence people drop their masks. He feels quite clearly that he can no longer become angry because he sees way down deep into the motives underlying each deed, and he understands everything and everyone to such an extent that he realizes there are no bad people, only ignorant ones, and these do what appears to be evil only because of their ignorance. He notices that his own destiny is beginning to move. His inner transformation is answered by fate and with outward change. These changes, of course, are different in each individual case as they correspond to the circumstances and the karma of the individual concerned. For this reason, the path the student must follow from here on cannot be described in general terms, for it is a very specific individual path. But whoever travels along the pathway toward white magic has, in any case, enough work ahead of him for many years, even if he only wants to hold on to the little bit he has gained at the beginning. And whoever has graduated from the beginner's level will know by his own means how to continue, for at the right time the higher powers give each of us the teacher he needs for guidance in his next stage of development. Let us remember the words of the greatest teacher of all. Ask, and it shall be given unto you. Seek, and ye shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened. Thank you.